There are two huge myths about the Xinjiang narrative. Now that the United Nations have been there and found there are no human rights abuses by China on Chinese, and the US are acting illegally and potentially abusing the human rights of Chinese people in the region, whether they be Uyghurs or not, we need to sort this out. So welcome to another edition of My Take on China, and this is going to be about Xinjiang again because there are big news things coming from the region that no one in Western media is talking about. The United Nations sent a special rapporteur to the region and she found no evidence of human rights abuses. What she did report was that many people had lost their jobs and were subject to economic coercion by the United States, which act illegally by placing arbitrary sanctions and refusing to allow the presumption of innocence. They go one step further by refusing to accept evidence that companies in the region present to them which prove they're not using forced labor in their supply chains. But this video is not about that. This is about the two biggest myths, the lies, if you like. Myth number one, China admitted there were re-education camps. And myth number two, the United Nations said there were up to 1 million Uyghurs in camps. Both are untrue, although both have been extensively reported as being true and are widely believed to be true. They've become an accepted part of the narrative based on the old adage that if you repeat a lie 1,000 times, it becomes the truth. I think that came from Goebbels. Here's the real truth. If we read carefully behind the headlines, if we just take a moment to establish sources and check them, we can learn what I'm saying is correct, what media are telling us is not. The Chinese government admitted there were many schools, vocational colleges, being built, almost 100% of which were both voluntary, and many of which have now been closed. That much is true. They admitted a program of de-radicalization for people who had been convicted of a crime, and then those people, after serving their sentences, some of them were vocationally trained. Now that must be better than sending them home with a brown paper bag and no future or no prospects. It was only Western media which called this a crime against humanity. It wasn't. If you believe what Western media tells you, then obviously I'm wasting my time talking to you. However, if you're smart enough to question this, you can go and find online that this is actually true. I'll help with the links. China dropped no bombs. It ethnically cleansed no towns, cities, or suburbs. It created no refugees, and in doing so, it lifted an entire region out of poverty. It turned agricultural regions into high-tech zones. It automated jobs, which in some countries are still being done by prisoners under forced labor conditions, and it effectively eliminated the root cause of the problem, poverty. The entire thing is not a secret. You can find out all about it on the State Council Information Office website in English. And to help you, I've linked that too. Now for the other one, the million incarcerated. Well, the Grey Zone reported this, but I've also written about it myself independently. But I'm not going to cross-reference or circular reference my own work. It's not hard to find. And I don't believe that any of this was ever true. What the Grey Zone did was to ask someone from the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights if they had actually said this. And they said, no. It was a question that was raised in a non-UN meeting by a non-UN person to others in the meeting who were in the UN building. Unfortunately, a Reuters journalist was in the room, and so the rumor was born. The truth is far more embarrassing. A certain German researcher, after conducting 8 interviews, extrapolated the information into a figure of at least 800,000 people incarcerated. And this is how misinformation got twisted so far from the truth. An Albanian Muslim called Oli Jazeski went and he saw for himself. He asked the question, can these people go home? And the answer was yes, they go home on Friday every week. He also asked, are they allowed to worship? And the answer was yes, at home they can. in schools in China, there is no religion of any sort allowed. Ossi then went to the European Parliament and lied about it, not because he had evidence, because by his own admission, in an interview with me, which is online, he said he didn't believe the answers. So he assumed they were fake. In reality, as the United Nations now know, there are no abuses. There is no persecution. Muslims are free to visit mosques. They practice as they wish. Xinjiang workers are all over China. Xinjiang food is available all over China. And if you go to Xinjiang, you can listen to local radio stations speaking local language. You can meet with kids who speak it freely, and you can even watch locally made TV shows in exactly the same way that you can in Guangdong, where my local TV station and radio stations broadcast in Cantonese. Of course, if you've already been so badly misinformed that you think China is evil and you hate the place and the people, you might cover this hatred with platitudes such as, I love China and I love the people, but I hate their government. Unless you've been here and asked people who live here in China what they think, you won't have a real picture, because all the information you're likely to read is misinformation. And when they aren't misinforming you, they're omitting to tell you. Unsurprisingly, everyone who does this, everyone who visits China and starts to ask people, turns around. You think people won't answer you honestly? They only like the CPC because they're afraid. Then you realize this isn't true. Most of them actually love the CPC. After a while, you remember what the Chinese did in 1911 to a government they didn't like, and then again in 1949 to another government they didn't like. They overthrew them. Then you start to understand why the CPC works so hard to meet the needs of the vast majority of people. They could easily be overthrown if they didn't. We, Westerners, need to stop thinking of Chinese people as mindless, brainwashed, but start thinking of them as intelligent, diligent, and hard-working people that they really are. Start planning your trip to talk with them, meet with them, and open your mind. Alternatively, if you don't like that, you can live with ignorance, as this nation, China, deals with the rest of the world and leaves the US and its cronies behind, because that really is what's happening now. And that's the two myths thoroughly debunked, and I might stay off Xinjiang for quite a long while now. We'll see what happens. Thanks once again for watching my take on China, and I will see you next time. Bye for now.